The sun was just beginning to dip behind the jagged peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, casting long, amber shadows across the sprawling expanse of the Blackwood Ranch. Silas Vance sat on his porch, a lukewarm cup of black coffee in his calloused hands, watching the dust kick up on the county road. Silas had owned these 400 acres for 40 years. It was a land of stubborn brush, rolling hills, and a silence so deep you could hear the heartbeat of the earth. But that silence had been under siege for 6 months. The trouble started when the Highlands at Mesa Crest was built. It was a luxury housing development that pressed right up against Silas's northern fence line. With the development came the Homeowners Association, and with the HOA came Mrs. Beatrice Sterling. Beatrice was a woman who treated the entire county like it was her personal living room. She drove a pristine, white Cadillac Escalade that looked like it had never seen a speck of dirt, until she started using Silas's private ranch road as a shortcut to the highway. The first time it happened, Silas had been polite. He'd waved her down and explained that the dirt track was private property, not a through street. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Beatrice had said, peering over her designer sunglasses. "It saves me 15 minutes of driving around the ridge, besides your gate is always open." "It's open because I'm hauling hay, ma'am," Silas replied. "But it's still my land, please use the paved road." She hadn't listened. Over the next few months, the shortcut became a habit. She didn't just drive through, she drove fast, spooking the cattle and kicking up rocks that dented Silas's equipment. He had installed a heavy steel gate with a chain and a padlock, but twice he had found the chain cut with bolt cutters. The local sheriff, a tired man named Miller, could only do so much. "It's a civil matter, Silas. Unless you catch her in the act of damaging property, I can't do much more than write a trespass warning." The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. Silas found his prize heifer, Clover, limping in the north pasture. The gate was swung wide, the lock missing entirely, and fresh tire tracks from a luxury SUV were burned into the mud. Silas didn't get angry in the way most men do. He didn't yell or throw things. He simply went into his workshop and started thinking. He was an old-school engineer by trade, a man who understood leverage, tension, and the laws of physics. "If she wants to treat my ranch like a highway," Silas whispered to his cattle dog, Blue, "then I suppose I should give her a proper toll booth." The preparation. For the next 3 days, Silas was a busy man. He didn't fix the gate. In fact, he left it invitingly open. But he spent hours working in the narrow bottleneck where the road dipped between two steep embankments, a spot Beatrice had to pass through to reach the highway. He wasn't going to do anything illegal, he wasn't going to hurt her, but he was going to make sure she never wanted to step foot on his dirt again. His neighbor, Jade, stopped by on the second day. Jade was a younger man, a mechanic who helped Silas with the tractors. He watched Silas rigging a series of heavy-duty industrial sensors and a high-speed winch hidden behind a stand of scrub oaks. "What are you building, Silas? Looks like a Rube Goldberg machine for billionaires," Jade laughed. "It's a lesson in boundaries, Jade," Silas said, wiping grease from his hands. "Mrs. Sterling believes that because she has a title in an HOA, she owns the horizon. I'm just reminding her where the horizon ends and Vance land begins." Silas had spent years studying the way the drainage worked on that part of the road. He knew that beneath the top layer of packed dirt was a thick, prehistoric layer of bentonite clay. When dry, it was hard as concrete. When wet, it turned into something akin to axle grease mixed with industrial glue. He rigged a hidden irrigation line from his water tank, buried 6 inches deep across a 20-foot stretch of the road. But that was only Phase 1. Phase 2 involved a very specific piece of ranch equipment, a massive, rusted-out 1950s manure spreader that he positioned strategically behind a blind curve, obscured by a camouflage tarp. The climax. Friday morning arrived with a clear blue sky. Silas sat in his high-ground blind, a spot tucked away in the rocks that gave him a perfect view of the shortcut. He had a thermos of coffee and a remote trigger in his hand. At 8:15 a.m., the familiar hum of a high-end engine vibrated through the air. The white Escalade appeared, barreling down the ridge with the confidence of a predator. Beatrice was behind the wheel, likely heading to her weekly brunch at the country club. She didn't slow down for the open gate. She sped through, her tires spitting gravel. As she hit the bottleneck, Silas pressed the first button. Silently, the underground line opened. Hundreds of gallons of water surged upward, saturating the bentonite clay from beneath. Within seconds, the solid road transformed into a soup of slick, gray primordial ooze. Beatrice hit the patch at 40 miles per hour. The Escalade didn't just slide, it pirouetted. The traction control system screamed in electronic agony as the tires spun uselessly, digging deeper into the clay. The more she floored the gas, which she predictably did, the deeper the heavy SUV sank. She was stuck, high-centered and buried to the wheel wells. Silas watched through binoculars. He saw her step out of the car, her expensive leather heels immediately disappearing into the muck. She let out a shriek that echoed off the canyon walls. Then came Phase 3. Silas climbed into his old, battered flatbed truck and drove down the hill. He pulled up just short of the mud pit, leaning his arm out the window. "Mornin', Mrs. Sterling," Silas called out cheerfully. "Looks like you've run into a bit of a geological anomaly." Beatrice was fuming. Her white slacks were splattered with gray clay. "Vance, you did this. Look at my car. I'm going to sue you for every blade of grass on this godforsaken rock." "I don't see what I did," Silas said innocently. "The ground gets soft in the spring. That's why I have no trespassing signs. They aren't suggestions, they're safety warnings." "Get your tractor and pull me out now," she demanded, waving her phone. "I have no signal out here." "Well now," Silas said, scratching his chin. "My tractor is currently rigged up for some maintenance work. It'll take me a while to get it free, but I tell you what, I can try to use the spreader to provide some traction for your tires." Before she could protest, Silas backed his truck up to the hidden manure spreader. He hooked it up and positioned the rear of the spreader, filled to the brim with 3-day-old fermented liquefied cow manure, directly facing the driver's side of the Escalade. "What is that?" Beatrice asked, her nose wrinkling as the breeze shifted. "Organic traction aid," Silas said. He reached for the lever. "Hold on to your hat." He engaged the PTO. The spreader roared to life. A geyser of dark, pungent semi-liquid fertilizer erupted from the machine. Silas had aimed it perfectly. It didn't hit the car with enough force to break glass, but it coated the white paint in a thick, dripping layer of concentrated ranch aroma. It filled the air intakes. It coated the door handles. It seeped into the crevices of the sunroof. Beatrice scrambled back, tripping and landing backside first into the bentonite mud. Silas shut off the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. "Now," Silas said, his voice dropping the cheerful tone and becoming as hard as the mountains. "Here, how this is going to go. I'm going to go back to my house and have my breakfast. I'll call the sheriff and tell him there's a trespasser stuck in the North Wash. He'll get a tow truck out here eventually, probably by tonight." "You can't leave me here," she wailed. "I can," Silas said, "because this is my land, and every time you cut my locks or drive over my grass, you're telling me that my rights don't matter. Well, Mrs. Sterling, the mud and the manure don't care about your HOA board or your country club, they only care about the laws of nature." He leaned closer. "If I ever see your car on this side of the fence again, I won't use the spreader. I'll just leave you to sink until the crows start nesting on your roof. Do we understand each other?" Beatrice looked at her ruined clothes, her buried car, and the grim, unwavering eyes of the old rancher. She didn't say a word, she just nodded. The resolution. The tow truck arrived 6 hours later. It cost Beatrice $4,000 in difficult recovery fees and another $3,000 for a professional detailer to try and fail to remove the smell of fermented manure from the Escalade's ventilation system. She sold the car a week later. Word traveled fast through the highlands at Mesa Crest. The residents learned that the grumpy old man on the ranch wasn't just grumpy, he was a tactical genius with a library of ways to make your life miserable if you crossed his fence line. Silas Vance sat on his porch a month later. The gate was closed, but the lock was new and untouched. He watched the sunset, the golden light hitting the spot where the road had been repaired. Blue the dog sat at his feet, tail wagging slowly. The silence had returned to the Blackwood Ranch, the deep, soulful silence that comes when people finally learn to respect the boundaries of the land. Silas took a sip of his coffee. It was hot, strong, and tasted like victory. He had spent his life protecting this soil, and for the first time in a long time, the soil felt safe. He looked at the gate, then back at the mountains. He didn't need a fancy title or a board of directors to rule his kingdom. He just needed a little bit of physics, a lot of patience, and a very large pile of manure. The HOA Karen never drove through his ranch gate again. In fact, she moved to a high-rise in the city 6 months later where the only thing she had to worry about was the elevator, and she never, ever looked back at the mountains. Silas smiled, tipped his hat to the setting sun, and went inside to start his dinner. The ranch was quiet, just the way it was meant to be.